how do they regulate us within our own environment? So I'll first start with the reptilian brain, which is the lower layer. As I've said, it's the most old and primitive part of our brain. It's what evolved the first, I would say, or what they would say. And it's just something very basic. It just regulates basic survival functions. For example, breathing, heart rate, or temperature, and digestion is also one. So basically everything that you unconsciously do without even thinking about it. You just eat foods and it gets digested. You don't have to think about, okay, now I have to pass it from my stomach to my darms. No, intestines. No, it's just autopilot functions. So something you don't have to think about. Most of these impulses that get here are not sent to the higher levels. Like if you eat something, you don't have to think about it. It just, the most of these breathing, for example, everyday functions never reach the higher layers, but some do. For example, if you touch something or you see something important, these information gets transferred to higher layers, and there the corresponding response will be made, what to do with it. So as I said, we have this lower layer, it's autopilot function, but we can override it by the higher layers. One good example for this is take that you see this one popular guy or girl that you see at school, and your heart starts pounding. Like, you cannot reasonably say why it's pounding, because nothing really has changed. There are still people around you. There is not something that you feel hungry or fatigued all of a sudden. There's not much of a state change for you. You're pretty much the same, but all of a sudden your heart starts pounding and you're like, wait, how does this happen? Like, your middle layer, the second layer, actually takes control over your primal layer for normal heart beating. And it's like, okay, you like this girl or this guy, I want you to be more active, more pumped, as I would say. And this is nothing that is this is not something that is correspondive with the lower layer. If you want to start consciously analyze these different situations, you will be able to recognize which layer converts in which response, but it's not something you can, like, it's not obvious always. Sometimes I still have behavior that I'm like, wait, where did that come from? And yeah, you learn something new every day of your life if you start to zoom in or focus in on these behaviors that you experience or portray. So one of the main functions for the reptilian brain is this auto-functioning. Autopilot is just your body knows what to do when it gets certain impulses and you don't have to act on it. Another function is actually to detect threats. So for example, if somebody comes with a knife at you, or something fast happens in the side of your eye, you will react to it instinctively. If you smell something and it smells bad, you will instinctively like pull away, like, ugh. It's something you don't have to consciously think about. It's just happening when there is the input. And in that sense, your lower layers also has certain things they don't have to pass to the upper layers. Like, some behavior or some actions can be taken already before upper layers have time to process it. It's something that they have authorized, or an authorization for to do. So these are immediate responses. They can be linked with release of hormones. For example, adrenaline. If somebody comes with a knife at you, your heart rate will start to rise. Your blood pressure will go up. Your respiratory rate will go up. All for you to be able to react to this situation instinctively, or reflexive. It's not something you have to consciously think about. So these are the main two functions, I would say, for the reptilian brain. So the autopilot and reacting to threat. Other functions you can say are like territorial or mating behavior that you're experiencing. I don't want to go into deep with this one, because I think we can all have examples for ourselves how primal our behaviors can be when we are in such conditions, when somebody is threatening our territory or our mate. Everybody can act very primal. To end off this lower layer, I want to say that it's maybe intuitive for most of us, but the lower layer is actually the closest physical to our sensor. So, for example, your spine or the back of your head right here. All my hair is here. So the back of your head, or the where the spine comes into your brain, that are the areas that resides, or where the lizard brain is, as people would say, or the reptilian brain. It's the ones that are the closest to where your sensors are, and they can react the fastest, like literally, to what is happening. That's why they're located there. Is the mammal brain, or the middle layer, I would say. So this is an evolution that has been very complex, and I would say it has allowed us, or mammals, to be way more emotionally thinking. So it's called emotional brain. It's how we can link emotions to things that happen to us, maybe from previous parts of us or previous experiences that we had, or with how we're feeling at that moment, or mood or motivation. It's all these feelings that we cannot really identify, but it does seep into the overall action that we do. If we're feeling happy in that day, we might start jumping up and down a little bit while we're walking outside. I don't know. It's just those little things that might influence our actions that we usually don't consciously think about. It's something that we feel. It can be like a gut feeling that we have. It's something we don't know how to explain or say why we think this thing, but we can feel good with it, or we can relate to it, or if we say, oh no, this looks bad, before we even know what is gonna happen, just because of the feeling, you know. I think it's not that hard to identify those things. But it's important to notice that it's also very complex. It's not just some 1 and 0 and one input in, one output out. Like I say, it's all the emotions, how you're feeling, how your memories are, how you are wired, and what you experience up until that point in your life. What kind of parts are there in the mammalian brain? So this is especially the limbic system. So it's just outside the center where our reptilian brain stops, where one onion peel stops, the other starts. So just where the brain stem. So we have the spinal cord, which is my hand. Then we have here the brain. Then it's this part across where the stem is arriving, that you can identify as the mammal's brain, or the mammalian brain. And it also involves the cortex. So I'll talk about it a bit later about the cortex, but the cortex is basically where the more complex stuff happens. It has more room and more ability to cross wire and have different inputs each other, and this is way more complex the more you go to the outside. So the outside of our brain is where the more complex stuff happens. The inside of our brain is where the more intuitive, emotional, genetical things happen. It's where more of our programmed functioning is taking place. I think it's important to notice the functions that mammalian brain specifically has. So we can identify the amygdala. This is a part of our brain in the center somewhere that regulates emotional responses. For example, fear and anxiety. It's a big driver for a lot of our actions. And I think you can already understand how influential these parts, or these brain parts, are in our day-to-day life, how they can shape whatever we think or do for that day, and how we respond to certain situations, even though they might not seem logical to the higher, the upper layer. It can also provides you with an automated response to certain things. Even you're not really consciously processing it, but you felt like you have already processed it before, and it's an automated response that you know how to deal, how to cope with something. This all lays within these areas. We also have the hippocampus, I'm sorry. This is involved in the formation and retrieval of memory. So hippocampus is one of the most studied areas when it comes to mice and stuff. They easy to operate and be able to alterate these parts of how memory works, how we can retrieve it, how it's stored. It's all these areas that are being closely examined. And then the last part of this system is the hypothalamus. And hypothalamus is basically our physiological functioning. So basically what when we have hunger, when we have thirst, or when we are in need of sexual behavior or sexual attention, these parts of our brain stimulates our desired output to make these things more likely to happen. So it can feed into our action to be, okay, if we're doing that, then we also have to go that way, because then we can stop there to get some food or something. It can be very subtle, and I can notice this in myself sometimes, that I try to implement such an idea with another idea in order to get one of these physiological functions fulfilled. These are the two structures that evolved in mammalians. So the cortex, the outside of our brain, and then we have the inside, which can be the limbic system. So why were we able to create these complex interactions, or these complex interactions between our brain areas when we evolved to be a mammal? This is because there was a new development of neurons. When we now had synapses. Synapses are basically the gap in between two neurons. So we have two neurons. My two hands are like one neuron, and there's like a gap in between where they don't physically meet. There's actually area in between where liquid can be and where different molecules can be released. So one of these neurons get activated, and then they release their message. So for example, if there is something positive, you want to send a positive message to the other neuron. This release a positive message or molecule that interacts with this next neuron at the synapse. So the synapse are the physical connection between the liquid in between and the start or the end of one of the neurons. So as I've said, there are positive messages, but of course there are also negative messages, and they can also flow from both sides. So one can say, hey, I have a positive message for you, and this one gets the message and it's like, wait a second, I don't want this message, I'm gonna send a negative message back to never send me this positive message again. So this is basically how conditioning happens. You give a positive message, he receives a positive message, and it sends a positive message back. It's like a closed feedback loop. Okay, I like what you're sending, I like what I'm receiving and the output I'm giving, so I want this to be happening more frequent. That's basically what happened with the mammals, and how we're able to learn, to memorize, and to adapt to our environments, especially when environments are changing more quickly than one generation, for example. Within one generation, then a lot of things might not apply that we inherently have within us. For example, that we run away from an overflying thing. If there are planes, we learn to not run away from them because there are always planes and it's something normal. But if you're like an animal that never has seen a plane and it might come over you, you're like, oh shit, I'm about to die. This is the end for me. You know, this is how we learn to adapt to these different situations or environments. So the last part, the upper layer, is actually the one that defines us, the human brain, and it has evolved way later. It's not actually a physical difference. It's more of an enhancement of the cortex, and they call this the neocortex. So basically the new cortex, or the improved cortex, and this is responsible for us higher cognitive functions. This allows us to create languages, abstract thinking, and art and stuff. But it is also involved in problem solving, in decision making. So a lot of these more complex things that are out of one person's mind and involves societal or like more different inputs than just one person can ever produce. How we can manage this for an individual is what happens in our neocortex. It's what makes us possible to create these larger complex institutions and networks of people and thoughts to be able to form into something real. It's what sets us apart, and you might think, oh, ants do the same thing. They're part of this larger phenomena, but they're not really consciously involved. It's just hormones driving them to certain places, them picking it up. It's their animal brain doing the work and the actual output or behavior that they express. So for us, we like to think that we have decision making in this and that we can choose our own thing, and that's maybe for another podcast if it's true or not. But basically, we like to think that we have the choice, that we like to be our own individual, and that we have our own values and norms that we want to follow by. So this is basically what differs us. It's not something physical with the mammals. We have similar brain structures and similar areas that are corresponding with them, but our, for example, neocortex is way more advanced, which is involved in, of course, in decision making, planning. Spatial awareness, for example, is also an area that has evolved or enhanced way better with us, and attention. And we can also have higher levels of visual processing. So pattern recognition, object recognition, these are all things that we are way better at than the normal mammal, I would say. It enabled us to be more proactive in our environment and take more advantage of our environment in order for us to be the dominant species in the world. It's what led us to make these kind of decisions and these kind of situations possible for us. I would not be podcasting here if we never developed this neocortex. We would just be monkeys in tribes, and we could be the smartest monkey out of the monkeys, but we still be monkeys, you know. Now we can say, okay, these areas have enhanced that much that we were able to separate ourselves by actually behavior and thoughts that we produced in comparison to the monkeys, I would say. Most of our day-to-day thoughts and behaviors all go through these layers, and they identify, and when they split off and where they get processed, it all defines who we are and how do we react. Some people might react emotionally to some things, other people might react intuitively to some things. It changes for everybody, or it's different for everybody, and that makes us or me or you. It's how we process these different income or inputs in a different layer or in a different way than another person would do, and that gives us another output, another thing we would say. You might say, hey, what's up, and I would say, yo, what's popping? Like, that's already two different things. That's just happened to be where you grew up and what friends you had around you. So I would say the human brain, to finish it off, is the part of you that you can actually take control of. It's the part of you that has the most control over your brain. It's the part of you that you can use to make you condition a certain way. I say condition, but actually, like, it's how we are as a person. If we don't condition ourselves for nothing, we are just emotionally reacting to everything. We don't have any grip over or control over ourselves, and we just use our lower and middle layer only. But if we condition ourselves to think certain way or to act certain way, and we consciously make decisions based on upon that idea, we will use our neocortex or our upper layer to make more informed decisions or solutions towards a broader or more complex idea than ourselves, or what goes on in our own brain. And I think that's the part that maybe not all of us use as much as we could have. I was not driven by a higher level of processing in my brain. Okay, I don't know what I'm saying in that part, but basically something I was not consciously working towards. It was just something that was happening to me. I was reacting to it, and that's basically first and second layer that I was using. So